Birthdays in my family, they were always supposed to be a big deal. Loud gatherings, too much food, that slightly off-key singing of happy birthday. For years I cherished those traditions, the comfortable chaos of it all. I genuinely thought we were close. Looking back now, it feels like watching a movie of someone else's life, fuzzy and distorted. This is still incredibly raw to talk about even after everything. The knots in my stomach just thinking about that specific. If you've ever felt that deep, sinking dread when something feels fundamentally wrong, even when everyone around you is smiling, maybe give this video a like so I know I'm not the only one carrying these heavy feelings. Deep breath. Let me take you back to that night. My 30th birthday. It was supposed to be special. The big 3-0. My parents, my older brother David and his perpetually smug wife Karen, my younger sister Chloe, they'd all gathered at the house. My house. Well, the house I'd lived in for the past 8 years. The house I'd poured countless hours and a significant chunk of my savings into renovating and maintaining after Grandma Rose passed away and left it, well, complicatedly, I'd always considered it the family anchor and implicitly my future home base. The evening started normally enough. Fake smiles plastered on, predictable presents wrapped in cheap paper, the slightly stale cake brought out. David made his usual slightly condescending jokes. Karen subtly critiqued the decor I'd spent months choosing, and Chloe seemed unusually quiet, avoiding my eye. There was an undercurrent, a tension I couldn't quite name, but I brushed it off as typical family dynamics. Maybe birthday nerves on my part. I needed to believe in the happy family charade just for tonight. After the awkward cake-cutting ceremony, my dad cleared his throat. "All right, Sarah," he said, using that overly jovial tone that usually preceded something uncomfortable. "We have one more surprise for you. Something important." He exchanged a quick, unreadable glance with my mom and David. My heart did a hopeful little flip. Maybe they'd finally sorted out the tangled paperwork regarding the house? Maybe they were officially transferring the deed, recognizing all the work and money I'd put in, making my quiet assumption a reality? That would be the best birthday gift ever. David stepped forward then, not with a brightly wrapped box but with a crisp, formal-looking envelope. He placed it on the coffee table in front of me. It wasn't a birthday card. It felt heavy, official. "What's this?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "Open it," Karen urged a little too quickly, a strange glint in her eye. My fingers fumbled with the seal. Inside wasn't a deed or a sentimental letter. It was thick legal paper. My eyes scanned the header, words blurring, then snapping into focus with sickening clarity. Eviction notice. The air left my lungs in a whoosh. Eviction? From my own home? On my birthday? I looked up, utterly bewildered, searching their faces for some sign this was a cruel, elaborate joke. But there was no laughter. My dad avoided my gaze, suddenly fascinated by a spot on the carpet. My mom twisted her hands in her lap, looking pale but resolute. David stared back at me, his expression cold, almost defiant. Karen wore a look of barely concealed triumph. Chloe looked like she was about to be sick. I don't understand, I stammered, the paper trembling in my hand. Eviction? Why? David sighed, the picture of put-upon reasonableness. Look, Sarah, it's just necessary. We've decided as a family that selling the house is the best option. Property values are high right now and frankly we need the capital. You've had a good run living here practically rent-free, but it's time. Practically rent-free? The words hit like stones. I'd paid the property taxes every year. I'd single-handedly funded the new roof, the boiler replacement, the kitchen renovation, tens of thousands of dollars. I'd cared for Grandma Rose in this house during her final years while they were all conveniently too busy. But all the work I did, the money I put in. My voice cracked. We talked about this being mine eventually. Karen scoffed audibly. Oh, don't be dramatic, Sarah. Those were improvements you chose to make while living here affordably. Consider it back rent. The house technically belongs to all of us now, inherited jointly. We've voted and the majority wants to sell. She conveniently ignored the complex codicil in Grandma Rose's will that mentioned my contribution and right of first refusal, something they clearly hoped I'd forgotten or wouldn't fight for. My dad finally spoke, his voice thick. "It's just logistics, sweetheart. You'll have 60 days, plenty of time to find a nice little apartment." A nice little apartment. They weren't just kicking me out. They were diminishing my entire life, my contributions, my emotional connection to this place, reducing it all to mere logistics. The coldness of it, the calculated betrayal, was staggering. They had planned this, waited until my birthday, likely thinking I'd be too emotional, too caught off guard to fight back effectively. Tears threatened, hot and sharp, but something else stirred beneath the shock. A flicker of icy rage. I looked from face to face, seeing not my family but strangers united by greed. As David started talking about listing agents and potential asking prices, completely ignoring my silent devastation, I overheard Karen whisper smugly to my mom, "See? Told you she wouldn't put up much of a fight. Where would she even get the money for lawyers?" That whisper. It was like a key turning in a rusty lock somewhere deep inside me. They saw me as weak, penniless, easily discarded, utterly alone in the wreckage of what I thought was my life, my safe harbor. Standing there, heart pounding, clutching that cursed piece of paper that felt like both an insult and a declaration of war, my vision blurred. But not entirely from tears. What would you have done in that exact moment? Facing your entire family united against you like that? Seriously, I'm curious about your gut reaction. Let me know that first thought in the comments below. And if you're wondering how anyone could possibly even begin to push back against something like that, hitting that like button tells me you want to hear the rest of this absolute nightmare. Because they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. Waking up the morning after my 30th birthday felt like surfacing into someone else's broken, unrecognizable life. The house, usually my sanctuary, felt alien and hostile. Every object seemed to mock me, whispering about the betrayal that had occurred within these walls. The silence was deafening, amplifying the echo of their cold words, the finality of that eviction notice sitting like a poisonous snake on the coffee table. Wow, just reading through your comments on the first part. Thank you. Seriously, knowing others felt that anger and disbelief right alongside me, that you saw the injustice. It helps more than words can say. Validates that I wasn't crazy. If you're back to see where this absolute train wreck leads, maybe give this part a like too? Because honestly, hitting rock bottom was just the beginning of the free fall. The immediate aftermath was a haze of disbelief and frantic, fruitless attempts at reasoning. I tried calling my mom, hoping for some flicker of maternal regret. The conversation was short, stilted. She recited lines that sounded suspiciously like David had coached her. "It's for the best, Sarah. Try to understand our position. We all need to move forward." No apology, no empathy, just hollow platitudes. Calling David was even worse. He was brusque, impatient. "Look, the decision's made. Stop being emotional. Get a grip and start packing. We need to get the house appraised next week." When I mentioned the money I'd invested, the renovations, Grandma Rose's wishes, he cut me off. "Irrelevant ancient history, Sarah. Legally, it's a joint inheritance. Majority rules. End of story." He spoke with the chilling finality of a corporate executioner, not a brother. Chloe, my younger sister, was the only one who showed a sliver of remorse. She texted me later, a string of apologies laced with fear. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I tried to argue but they wouldn't listen. David and Karen, they were relentless about the money." She admitted they'd been planning it for months, waiting for the right time, my birthday, banking on me being too shocked or sentimental to react strongly. Her apology felt genuine, but ultimately she had sided with them. She hadn't stood up for me when it counted. The sense of utter abandonment was crushing, my entire family fractured by greed. Days bled into weeks. I functioned on autopilot. Packing felt impossible. Where would I even go? Every box I taped up felt like sealing a coffin lid on a part of my life. The financial reality began to sink in. I worked a decent job as a project manager, but housing costs in the city were astronomical. Finding a comparable place on my own salary, especially after sinking so much into this house, felt like an insurmountable mountain. Panic gnawed at the edges of my numbness. They were right. How could I afford lawyers? How could I possibly fight this? They didn't make it easy. David would call with updates, scheduling appraisals, discussing open houses, completely disregarding my presence, treating me like inconvenient furniture they had to clear out. Karen would pop by, unannounced, ostensibly to measure windows for staging photos, her eyes sweeping critically over my belongings, making passive-aggressive comments about clutter. Each visit felt like a fresh violation, a deliberate twist of the knife. They wanted me broken. They wanted me gone. I hit my lowest point about 3 weeks after the party. I was sitting alone in the half-packed living room, surrounded by boxes and ghosts of happier times. The eviction notice lay on the mantelpiece like a skull. Despair washed over me, thick and suffocating. Maybe they were right. Maybe I should just give up, crawl away, find some tiny, soulless apartment and let them carve up the spoils. Let them win. Tears I thought had dried up started to fall again, hot and hopeless. Was my life just over? It was in that moment of absolute despair, staring blankly at the bookshelf I needed to dismantle, that my gaze snagged on something tucked away on the bottom shelf, almost hidden behind a stack of old photo albums. A sturdy, unassuming accordion file folder labeled simply, Grandma Rose House Affairs. Grandma Rose had been organized, fiercely independent, and deeply mistrustful of banks and sometimes, even family members getting too helpful with finances. During her last year, when her mind was still sharp but her energy waned, she'd sometimes call me into her study, the room David now used as his dumping ground when visiting, and have me sort through papers, pay bills online under her watchful eye, file documents. She'd mutter things about keeping things straight, not letting the vultures get clever. At the time I hadn't paid much attention to the specifics, focused only on helping her. After she passed and the initial flurry of legal readings happened, David had quickly taken charge of the important estate documents. This folder, seemingly containing older, less relevant correspondence and receipts, had been shoved aside, forgotten by everyone, including me until now. A flicker of something pierced through the fog of despair. Not hope exactly, more like curiosity, or maybe just a desperate need for distraction. Listlessly, I pulled the folder out. It was thick, crammed with papers yellowed with age. Old utility bills, decades-old contractor receipts, faded letters. And then tucked deep in the back, a separate, neatly labeled section. Mortgage and title, private agreements. My breath caught. Inside were documents I hadn't seen since the initial estate reading years ago. Documents David had assured us were standard, and he would handle. But here they were. And as I started reading, slowly at first, then with growing urgency, the room started to spin. There was the original deed, yes, listing joint inheritance. But stapled meticulously behind it was a legally notarized codicil to Grandma Rose's will, the one David dismissed as irrelevant. It explicitly stated that in recognition of my substantial financial contributions and my role as her primary caregiver, I held a majority equity stake, 60%, in the property, far exceeding a simple joint share, and possessed the undisputed right of first refusal at a predetermined, modest valuation, before any external sale could be considered. But that wasn't all. The real bombshell lay beneath that. Years ago, facing a financial crunch due to medical bills, Grandma Rose had apparently taken out a significant private second mortgage on the property, not from a bank, but from me, quietly using a lump sum I had myself inherited from a distant great-aunt and naively loaned to Grandma years prior, formalized through a lawyer she trusted, not the family's usual one, David, handling the main estate, clearly either never found. This private agreement deliberately ignored it, thinking it wasn't properly filed, or assumed I'd forgotten entirely about that long-ago loan. This document wasn't just filed. It was ironclad, registered correctly against the property title. Which meant, I wasn't just a tenant they could evict. I wasn't just a minority shareholder they could outvote. I was effectively the primary lien holder. They couldn't sell the house without satisfying my loan first. A loan that, with accrued interest Grandma had insisted on a fair rate, was now worth a substantial portion of the house's current market value, possibly more than their collective minority shares combined after taxes and fees. I sat there on the floor surrounded by boxes clutching these forgotten papers. The room was silent but my mind was roaring. The implications crashed over me wave after wave. The shock, the disbelief, and then something else. A slow, strange heat spreading through my chest. The despair evaporated, replaced by an icy, crystalline clarity. The tears stopped, and a slow, almost involuntary smile began to spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed a loaded weapon after being backed into a corner. Karen's smug whisper echoed in my ears. Where would she even get the money for lawyers? Oh, they had no idea. They thought they were playing checkers while I was sitting on a hidden chessboard with nearly all the power pieces. And that's when it shifted. That tiny spark ignited by forgotten paperwork. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken since my disastrous birthday. Do you believe someone can truly find their strength after being shattered into a million pieces like that? Finding power in unexpected places? I often wonder about resilience. Drop a comment with your thoughts. And if this journey from utter despair to a glimmer of defiance resonates, maybe share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own hidden power, their own forgotten folders. Because the plan taking shape in my mind then, cold, clear and legally sound. Well, let's just say my dear family thought the game was over. They had no idea I was about to flip the entire damn board. Alright, deep breath. The discovery of Grandma Rose's meticulously kept records wasn't just a lifeline, it was a declaration. The fog of grief and helplessness burned away, replaced by a glacial focus. No more tears, no more pleading, just strategy. It was time to stop playing defense and go on the offense. So many of you commented on part 2 demanding justice, feeling that righteous anger for me. Honestly, reading your support, knowing you were rooting for me, it felt like fuel poured on that tiny spark of defiance. If you're ready for the moment everything changed, the final act where the tables don't just turn, they violently flip over, show some love with that like button. Let's get into exactly how it all went down. The first step was silence. I stopped engaging with David's calls about appraisals or Karen's intrusive visits. I let their messages go to voicemail, their knocks go unanswered. I needed space to work, undisturbed. My second step was hiring the best damn property lawyer I could find, funded, ironically, by finally cashing in some investments made with the proceeds of that initial loan to Grandma, something I'd kept separate all these years. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evans, reviewed Grandma Rose's documents, her eyes widening slightly as she absorbed the implications of the codicil and the registered second mortgage. "Hayes," she said, a slow smile mirroring the one I'd felt days before, "your family appears to have made a significant and potentially very costly miscalculation. We spent the next week drafting, not pleas, not negotiations, formal legal notices, one asserting my majority equity and right of first refusal based on the codicil, demanding they cease all sale preparations immediately, and the second, the real checkmate move, a formal demand for payment on the outstanding second mortgage, plus all accrued interest payable within 30 days, noting that failure to pay would initiate foreclosure proceedings against their minority shares. The day Evans had the notices formally served via courier felt monumental. I pictured David's face, Karen's probably, when they received registered mail demanding they pay me a substantial six-figure sum or risk losing their claim entirely. No more casual eviction threats. This was hardball, backed by indisputable legal standing. The explosion wasn't immediate, but it was spectacular when it came. It wasn't a phone call. It was all of them. Dad, Mom, David, Karen, even a reluctant looking Chloe dragged along, appearing on my doorstep less than 48 hours later. David bypassed the doorbell, pounding on the door loud enough to rattle the frame. I opened it calmly, blocking the entrance. Yes? I asked, my voice level. David's face was puce. What the hell is this, Sarah? He sputtered, waving the demand for payment notice. Foreclosure? What is this garbage? It's not garbage, David, I replied, my newfound calm infuriating him further. It's a legally registered debt against this property. A debt your mother, father, and sister are now minority shareholders in. Grandma Rose borrowed the money from me years ago. It was all properly documented and filed. You should have checked the title records more carefully before sending me an eviction notice. Borrowed from you? My dad looked utterly bewildered. When? How? Do you remember Great-Aunt Carol's inheritance I received? I asked him directly. Grandma needed help with medical expenses shortly after. She insisted on formalizing it as a loan against the house equity to protect my investment. She was smarter than you gave her credit for. Karen pushed forward. This is ridiculous. Fabrication. We'll fight this. Evans, who I'd asked to be present, waiting discreetly inside, stepped smoothly into the doorway beside me. Fight it with what, Mrs. Harrison? She asked coolly, holding up certified copies of the notarized loan agreement and the land registry filing. The debt is valid, secured, and overdue. Unless your clients, she glanced at my stunned parents and siblings, can collectively produce approximately $185,000. She named the calculated sum including interest, within the next 28 days. My client, M. Hayes, as the primary lien holder and majority equity owner, will have every right to proceed with foreclosure on your minority shares and take full possession, or force a sale where her secured debt is satisfied first, leaving potentially very little, if anything, for the remaining shareholders after costs. The color drained from their faces. $185,000. It was an impossible sum for them to raise quickly, especially David and Karen, who I suspected lived well beyond their means. They stared at the documents, then at me, comprehension finally dawning. The smug certainty was gone, replaced by sheer panic. My mom started to cry. Sarah, please, we didn't realize. David turned on Karen. You said this was straightforward. You said she had nothing. Karen rounded on my dad. Well, you were supposed to handle the estate properly. The united front crumbled instantly, devolving into furious, panicked accusations right there on my doorstep. Their greed, their arrogance had led them straight into a trap of their own making, sprung by forgotten paperwork and underestimated loyalty. My offer stands, I said quietly over the rising tide of their bickering. You have 28 days to arrange payment. Or you can sign over your minority shares to me now in lieu of the debt and walk away cleanly. They didn't have the money. After a week of frantic failed attempts to secure loans, likely hindered by their now strained relationships and potential credit issues, they capitulated. Bitterly, resentfully, they signed the papers. Evans prepared, relinquishing all claim to the house. The house I loved, the house I'd cared for, was finally, indisputably mine. The first thing I did after they left, transferring their small remaining belongings in stony silence, was change the locks. The second was to start boxing up everything that reminded me of them. It wasn't about revenge anymore, not really. It was about boundaries. It was about reclaiming my space, my peace, my life. I decided to sell the house. It held too many ghosts, too much baggage. With the full equity now mine, I sold it quickly in the hot market, realizing a significant profit, enough to buy a beautiful modern condo downtown, furnish it exactly as I liked, establish a healthy emergency fund, and invest the rest wisely under my control. I started fresh, lighter, unburdened. I haven't spoken to David or Karen since. My parents have tried reaching out, hesitant apologies offered, but the trust is shattered beyond repair. Chloe and I are slowly, cautiously rebuilding a connection, but it will never be the same. Sometimes the price of greed is the family you destroy along the way. Standing in my bright new living room, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over a city full of possibilities, I sometimes think back to that devastating birthday. It's strange how the worst day of your life can inadvertently become the catalyst for finding your strength, for understanding what, and who, truly matters. They tried to evict me from a house. Instead, they evicted themselves from my life. And that favor? I returned it with a quiet smile and the stroke of a pen. And that's how I finally took back my control, my future. It wasn't a path I chose, but walking it made me who I am today. What's the biggest takeaway for you from this entire chaotic ordeal? What does family truly mean when faced with betrayal like this? I genuinely find reading your perspectives so insightful, so please share them in the comments below. If this story struck a chord, or if you think someone else out there needs to hear about finding strength in the face of overwhelming odds, hitting like and share truly helps these stories reach them and lets me know you appreciate this kind of real, raw content. Thank you sincerely for listening all the way through to my journey. Stay strong out there.